Hello, Tom Levecchia here with the latest edition of the New Theory podcast. As you see, we are starting to do more video podcasts. So, A, I have to lose some weight. And B, we are here to welcome our special guest, Felix Levine, who
Thank you so much for having me on, Tom.
he's a awesome podcaster. I watch the show religiously, and I wouldn't say I'm a purist, but just he's a good guy. The way he asks questions, who he is hard to reach guests, how he unpacks it, how he shares it, and we're going to talk a little bit about his podcast and him, and then I also want to unpack why you should maybe start your podcast or got to get going on other stuff because with COVID and new normal, it's a different ballgame. So Felix Levine, welcome again.
Thank you so much, man. I'm excited.
All right, so let's talk about the podcast that got my attention. I stumbled across, we had John Nalite on the podcast, so he was on a few times. We shared some guests, Gene Borelli and Michael Frances. You have some pretty heavy hitters. So first, give us the genesis. Why did you start a podcast, and walk us through that?
So I guess the longer story is last year was my first year of college. I went to UC Santa Barbara,
Cool.
and I then transferred to Boston University. But so my freshman year of college, when I was at UC Santa Barbara, I was basically looking to get out. I knew I'm from New York City, so I was like, you know what, this is not the place for me. It's a beautiful place, but slow pace, not the energy I was looking for. And so I basically, at one point, about midway through the year, just completely isolated myself from everyone there, like just fully like cold turkey, stopped talking to people. And I was like, you know what, right now we're just going to focus on transfer applications and getting good grades so I can get out of here. And in that time, I was like, okay, definitely it was weird for me because I'm a pretty social person.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, like what are other ways that we can kind of fill that void? And I don't even know why I isolated myself. It was mostly just like, what, I'm going to be out of here in 3-4 months. And so at that point I was just like, all right, let's look into this podcast thing. I was a huge UFC fan, still am, obviously. Had heard of this Joe Rogan guy and his podcast. So I was like, you know what? I've heard rave reviews about him, and I love Rogan as a commentator. Let me take a listen. And then I just became obsessed. I would listen 4 to 5 hours a day. I was, in between classes, listening on my bike ride to and from my dorm. I would say no to eating dinner with friends and instead just listen to Rogan. Like, it was just nonstop. And I realized how much I enjoyed it, not just because of the content, but what I was learning. And it kind of hit me at one point where I would be listening and maybe I would be wondering something, and maybe a couple minutes later he would ask the question. And so I was like, okay, I'm pretty social. I am pretty confident in my ability to talk to people. And I really love, like, he has the coolest range of guests. And so I always felt like I wanted to talk to some of these people, but I just, I was just an ordinary person. It's like, what's the excuse for them to talk to me? They have so much, so little time. So at one point it just became like, okay, if I started this, what would it look like? And so, at that point I had finished up my applications and I just really started grinding. I mean, literally night and day. I would finish school, I would come home, hammer out emails, hammer out all the logistics of getting guests. And I mean, everything that goes into a podcast, the production, how it was going to start, I wanted out. Exactly. Like, I was 19 at the time. So it was like, okay, well, I'm young. How do I sound professional? Because, for me, I wasn't too worried about how it would sound in terms of my questions, at least earlier on. It was more like, I don't want to have this, shitty audio, and I'm already young and there's already no reason for people to listen to me. So, on top of that, audio quality is bad, video quality is bad. So there's a whole lot of things that I had to figure out. And then it was just, once I had all the foundations set, it was like hammer out a million emails, hope that one guest says yes. And then, one would say yes. And then I'd have a couple guests and they would see that the past guests were, if they respected them, maybe they would want to come on. And then likewise with sponsors, I'd hammer out thousands of emails, see if a sponsor would be willing to sponsor me. So that's just kind of the overall gist of how I got into it.
Well, when I get the sponsors, we're going to spend a minute on too, because people I think get into podcasting for the wrong reasons, and we'll talk a little about that arc of when do you get a sponsorship to join a network and that kind of stuff. So, okay. So the first observation was you got some pretty, so again, these are guests that I would say we overlap probably at least about 4 or 5 guests. And I've been doing this a minute. I've been doing this for over 2 years, and I'm not anywhere where I need to be, but I'm pretty good about getting people on the show. Just what I'm good. I always say, like, okay, granted, I can't get like Donald Trump on or somebody super A-list right now, maybe, but anybody I wanted to get on that I envisioned, I got on. So give us, how did you get some of these people? Give us their names, and and how do those interviews work for you?
So, in the beginning, it was like, all right, I'm 19. I don't have a career behind me. It's not like, if like a Bill Burr or like, I love Bill Burr. It's not, but it's not like if you have like an A-list celebrity who's like, I'm going to start a podcast, they have all their fans that automatically, gravitate. And it's already a big thing right when they start. For me, I'm 19. I don't have a whole career and I haven't really established myself at all. So, it was like, okay, how am I going to do this? And at first it was like, all right, are there people that are closer to me that, maybe my dad's friend or someone that my mom knows that, has an interesting life that would be willing to do it for me. And the first guest that I had was my dad's friend, a guy named Paul Tucker, who was a Claude Monet enthusiast.
Wow.
And, he, has written book on book, curated show at the biggest museums, like really, really smart guy, really great guy too. And so from that point on, it was just like, okay, here's my first guest. And then after I did all this work, I was like, fuck, I need another guest. So
Hold on. I want to pause you right there.
Go
So
for
you
it.
get Paul Tucker on, you nail down your first podcast where you use lips and whatever, you distribute it across the 20 channels. What were the results? Yeah. Did you get 6 listens? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was probably like all my family and a few friends that were bored one day. And, that's basically what it was. You look and you see, 10, 15 downloads, your hype, but I think there was a point where it was just like, holy, fuck, like, how am I gonna, I want to do this on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. Like, how am I going to do this? And so, at that point, I was like, all right, we got to start hammering out emails. We got to space it out right. I think, that's something we can talk about later too, is, for me, I like to record in advance because I don't like to be stressed about having to release, or to record so that I can release within a couple of days. And so, for me, that first episode that I recorded was, I also wanted to find someone who's local. I was in Santa Barbara. Paul was in Santa Barbara. I had to find a studio. My audio engineer, the guy who ran the studio, has since been my audio engineer since day one. He also, shout out to him. He's he co-produced, I think, Katy Perry's album. So he was one of the top guys. So it was really cool to start working with people like that. And so, yeah, at one point I had, my first couple of guests. Then my second or third guest was, one of my friends' dads, who's actually he's a best-selling author, Daniel Coyle. And so it basically was like that. And then it was just writing out emails, having like a general kind of template email and then curating it to whoever my guest was, and seeing if people were interested, seeing if there was, if they would ask a little bit more about my show, and, just trying to convince them to do it, really. And then one of my earlier on guests was this guy named Eric Anders, UFC fighter. And he was like, hey, I'm down, which was crazy for me at the time. I was 3 episodes in. A UFC fighter who I watch on ESPN said, yeah. And he was coming to the West Coast. So I went down to Anaheim, took a train, had to find a studio there. The experience of being with him and his wife in the car, who are great people. We took a cab together. We talked a little before, it was that will always stick with me forever. So it really got to a point where, I was getting the guests slowly once I had the best-selling author and the UFC fighter, and, then I could start to promote myself as more of a brand, I guess. And then, some of the big hitters, as you mentioned, then it gets into the John A. Lights and the Michael Franzese. And, then if for people like UFC, the John Anik and the Mark Normans, if you like comedy. And, it's every different guest I have a story for, really. It might have started out with me reaching out to their agent or DMing them on Instagram or whatever it may have been. And then, you hope that they see it at the right time, that they're available. And for me, the real thing that I learned is whenever an opportunity presents itself, you say yes. Like, whenever if they say Tuesday, June 25th at 6 p.m., Tuesday, June 25th at 6 p.m., I'm there. I'll move my whole schedule around it because you don't know when these opportunities come back again. And people that are high profile, they have busy lives. They move on quick. My show is not, it is what it is, but they could do another show and forget about mine. I've seen it happen. So whenever an opportunity came, I always took it. And again, it's really been a domino effect, or snowball effect, excuse me, of, you get this guest, then you reach out to another guest and they see that you've gotten that guest. So now they're more willing. Same with a sponsor, I could charge something, a year ago that was, what it is now, perhaps much less, but because they've seen that I've had 3 or 4 different sponsors and the way that I advertise, they're more interested. Because I've had X amount of views here, then other guests want to do this. So it's just like a whole little, it all kind of piles together. And now that I'm also working on the Johnny and Gene show with A-Light and Brello as a co-host there and managing it, that's also different exposure. So it's kind of it's been a weird year. I'll be honest with you. It's been a crazy year, but I love it.
So, okay. So I want to unpack a few things. So in terms of audience development, which is, I think, as hard, if not harder, than producing the content, typically it's the other way around. And was it, okay, I want to give you 3 options. It could be any, or a hybrid of 3. One is all organic. You just release a shit ton of content, watch it grow. B, hybrid of, hey, released it and did true, real paid posts, put out a ton of money and worked, probably at a loss. Or C, A and B, but a little fake it before you make it. And listen, we're all human, right? Juice the numbers up a little bit to make you look bigger than you are. What was your audience development strategy and how to pan out?
I think honestly it was probably a mixture of all 3.
Okay.
I think it was I think a couple things. I think growing an audience organically is incredibly difficult.
Correct.
And it's let me rephrase that. It's incredibly difficult for the ordinary person.
Yeah.
I think
without a platform, correct.
Without a platform. I think for someone like myself, it was because I had these high profile guests, and if they were willing to even just a retweet on Twitter, I mean, I can't even tell you how much that changed. I mean, for Mark Normand is, you may or may not be familiar with him. He's a great comedian, did Rogan a couple times, and great guy too. And he literally just retweeted my post when I released it. And I had never gotten, I don't know, more than a couple hundred views or downloads at that point, and it went to like 11,000 in a couple days.
Oh, wow.
So just that alone was huge. So now I've gotten to a point where I've learned to really ask people to share, because if they're going to take the time and come on my show, well, then, and I would say, I can say confidently they had a good experience, and it's something, and at some point they said something that they'd love for their fans to hear, then I'd hope that they'd be willing to reshare it, because not only is that great for my show, it's great for them to promote themselves, whatever. So that was the first thing. In terms of fake it till you make it, I'm a big believer in kind of fake it till you make it to a certain extent, right? I mean, I think when you're trying to either convince a guest or a sponsor of endorsing you or coming on your show, well, pick your best numbers. I mean, don't lie about your numbers, but if you did 40,000 on a video and maybe some of your other videos only get 100 views, talk about your 40,000. That's just that's marketing 101, they can, it's public information to go on YouTube and see how many views you have. Downloads is a little bit different, obviously, but they can kind of gauge where you're at. They can see the kind of guests you have. They can see the production you have. So, I think there's different levels to it. And then I think, in terms of growing your audience, I mean, I think for me, I'm someone who's never satisfied in that regard, right? I mean, I think I'm happy with where I'm at. I don't feel like I'm at 1% of what it can be. Yeah. So, for me, it's every day. How do I market? How do I, get more guests? And how do I continue to grow the brand, grow the audience, grow the production? And I think, people that I model myself after in terms of marketing in this new world is someone like Andrew Schultz, who is, in my opinion, the greatest marketer right now. I mean, just the little clips he posts on Instagram, how clean his Instagram looks, the different captions, the different, IGTV covers. There's so many different things that play into it. And so for me, every single dollar that I made from sponsorships, which is not an incredible amount, but every single dollar that I had to my name or in terms of sponsorships was going to go and reinvested back into my show. It was to making the small Instagram promotional clips that I don't have the capacity or the capabilities of doing. It was to making sure the audio was 100%, the best it could be with the best engineers, to making sure my videos are clean, to making sure my YouTube looks good. I have someone who's working on it and making the thumbnails. Every single dollar, like I'm 20 years old. There's no reason I need to take the $50 or the $100 that I'll make on an episode to go and spend on shoes, reinvest it. And, eventually it'll pay off. And already, there are things that I can't really go into right now, but in the next 3 or 4 months, there are a lot of really big things that are going to happen or supposed to happen with my show. And it's making me feel like all those financial investments I'm making in myself are really going to pay off. And you see the Rogan $100 million deals. You see the huge deals that are obviously for the top of the crop, but I'm 20 years old. So I have, I'm not worried about what it's going to look like in 2 or 3 years. If I do this as I'm doing it for 10 years and try to improve daily, then I do think that the potential is there. And I, if I work at it, then, we'll see where it goes again. But for me, it's really not about trying to make money in the short term, because again, I tell people now, people call me and I get messages all the time like, hey, can you help me? I want to start a podcast. Can you tell me how to do it? It's like, yeah, I tell them one thing: if you're going into podcasting to make money, get out right now. Only maybe the 1% do. And you got to really work your ass off. So that's kind of my mentality as of today.
Okay. So you answered my next question, which was basically what was your goal in terms of monetization? So you pretty much were comfortable either running at a loss or reinvesting. So doing this as a growth mechanism. So that all makes sense. So give us your peak month of total streams, A to Z, all in, and then give us the total amount spent to reach that. So it might have been organic or spent, but I want to know, hey, I reached 60,000, whatever, 20, whatever it was, and then what was total spent?
I haven't spent $1 on marketing in terms of like, how you can promote stuff on, actually that's not true. On Instagram, sometimes I'll do like $10 or $15 on
Oh, so you don't boost, so you have somebody on, you don't boost that show?
In terms of, say I had like a Michael Franzese on, right? That was my biggest month in terms of downloads, because I also had John. I don't even know how it went, but I think I had Gene before, who's also he's my second best episode right now. So I think that month, honestly, I had maybe 60,000 views on YouTube.
Oh, wow.
A couple more thousand on my downloads, on my audio versions, because I really started to spend money, at least on my on making my YouTube channel look good, right? I have a guy who works with me, this guy named Odie, shout out to him, who does all my thumbnails, and he'll do a little bit of optimization, stuff like that. In terms of dollars that I've spent on promoting it on a Facebook or an Instagram, I haven't done that in actually a couple months. Okay. But for me, the biggest tool, without a doubt, again, I said it earlier, is getting those high profile guests with big followings to retweet and reshare and, plug you wherever they can, because that just makes a world of a difference. Yeah. And so, in terms of, I think that's, to answer your question, that's, my peak month, I think it was probably around 60 or 70,000 views and downloads. And, what's cool is that it really, before maybe a year ago, if I was getting, a couple downloads a day on my audio versions, now we're at 50 or 60 a day. Right. And the YouTube, it'll be a couple hundred, a couple thousand a day. So it'll just start to mount slowly and slowly and slowly. And I think, at my studio here in Brooklyn, I have the studio manager, shout out to Josh Wilcox. He's a great guy, because I spent so much time with him. He's there with all my sessions, and he's seen me grow really since, the first kind of episodes. Yeah. And he said something that's really important, I think. And he said, you need to really build a loyal fan base that's willing to share it with their friends. And I think that's when you look at the Joe Rogan army per se, that's really what it is on a bigger scale, right? It's people that are incredibly loyal. that love his show, that'll listen religiously, that trust who he's bringing on, and we'll share it. We'll tell their friends, yo, listen to this episode. This was crazy. Or do this, do that. And now, you know, even if I have a couple people that'll consistently reach out, that already for me is really important because it gets the ball rolling, and it makes me understand that people who really like my show are going to be more willing to share it. And I need to target people that I think would like it. Those people that then do like it, I need to make sure that they stay on for longer. I need to make sure that they're sharing with their family. So it's a whole different, you know, it's marketing is a really, really interesting thing because I think for a show like mine, especially where I have, you know, high profile people, I do think that if I had a bigger name, the view counts would be very much larger, right? And so sometimes that's hard. If I put out an episode, like I had an Alexander Volkanovski episode, UFC champion, who's fighting in a couple days actually. And, you know, I think it's done 100, 150 views. Sugar Sean O'Malley, another phenomenal UFC fighter. You know, both of them, not to bash them, I love them. You know, they're busy. They didn't reshare and whatnot and might have a couple hundred views. Whereas if they did on a bigger show, it'd have 10, 20, 100. I mean,
I'm not gonna lie to you. So I was debating whether or not to say this, but you know, I've had some pretty notable people on, and to be really straight up, the more notable they were, and that's some A-list billionaires, the more notable. I don't know if any of them shared. Like, and I had good interviews. Gary Vee, like afterwards, he was like, "Wow, like you asked the right questions. Like this is going somewhere." And I had like communications, like Al Sharpton, like I became like friends with them, and like these people, we literally like ingratiated ourselves in the discussion, kind of similar to what we're doing now. And then when it came time, is I get more, with all due respect, to the Felix Levines who share with their family and friends and get the 150 that day versus Perez Hilton who just didn't share. And I did ask some folks, not directly talent, but managers and stuff. And the reason why they do these podcasts is they'll reach somebody that they normally wouldn't reach, and it may be one and maybe 1,000, but it's worth it for them, even if they're say, you know, kind of A- list, right? However, a lot of them don't share because either they want to get paid or they want something for it, or they're maybe not, you know, think it's not that big of a deal. So yeah, I know the strategy, get them to say some shocking or get like that one liner and then promote it to press and get it to move and stuff. So I that's near and dear to my heart. You know, so what happens for us is we got to boost it paid, or we have to, you know, optimize, spend more time optimizing it, more time sharing it. So there's a cost either way, but we do it because we love it. It's not a revenue center. So now I want to kind of cross the arc to monetization. So give us, you know, some of your first sponsors. How did you get them other than hustling? And how did that factor into everything?
Yeah, so a couple episodes in, I literally 2 episodes in, I reached out to this company. I was emailing a bunch of companies. I mean, I literally, you know, had more of like a template email that was like, you know, had all my information about myself. And then I would try to tailor it a little bit towards the different companies. I would look up, you know, meat and shipping company, juice company, you know, whatever the industry, and then just go down the list and start emailing. And then it was really like, you know, again, if 1% says yes, successful. So, you know, a couple episodes in, my first sponsor is this company, US Wellness Meats, that is still my sponsor today. And I'm grateful for them. And in the beginning, you know, they gave me, you know, X amount of dollars. It was nothing, you know, substantial, obviously, because I'm new. But for me, it was like the coolest thing in the world because I was like, holy shit, someone's actually giving me money to do this. This is, you know, this is really cool. And so from that point on, it was kind of that's literally that same process. Just emailing, seeing if a company would bite, see if they would say, hey, can you give us a little bit more information about your show? How much money are you looking for? X, Y, and Z. And as I started to move up a little bit, then it was, you know, a couple episodes after that, maybe 10 or 15 episodes into my show, sponsor Manscaped, they came on. I know they sponsor a ton of other shows, and they were willing to give me a little bit more depending on where I placed my stuff. They saw that I had some high profile guests. They thought it could be a good idea, that I was young and whatnot. And so then from then it just kind of, you know, kept going a little bit here and there. I mean, again, if I send out 500 emails and I have 4 sponsors, that tells you what you need to know. It's tough. It's competitive. They have, X amount of dollars and they want to spend it the best ways. And so for me, it was also, a different kind of angle in terms of monetization because I'm younger. It was really trying to market myself as more of quote unquote the future generation, investing in potential success down the line as well. And, it worked different with every company. Some companies are more interested in ROI, seeing what they can make on, their investment. And some companies don't really care that much about that and care more about the brand association and, whatever that means right now. And so for me, it was really a variety of different people that I was working with, different companies, different ways of marketing. But for me overall, it was the same mentality of I need to just grind these emails out, because I know if I send a certain amount, one is going to say yes. And, it takes a lot of no's. I mean, I can't, if you looked into my inbox and saw for my sponsors and for my potential guests, all the emails I sent out and how many yeses I had, I mean, it would take you years to find those yeses because they're so buried deep inside. Yeah. So, it's really a grind, but, what's been really cool is the more I grow my show, the more money I can ask for, the more I have these really cool guests. And, the other big thing is these guests have kindly endorsed me in a way, because some, next week I'm actually going to have Christina Hutchinson. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's a co-host of the Guys We Fuck podcast. Did Rogan a couple times or one time, I don't know. And she's phenomenal. And just having those guests come on again, showing that they're interested in doing the show again. And just kind of, on camera, them saying at the end, this was really amazing. And, maybe sharing that clip with those sponsors. Or if I have a friend, Zeus, who at the end said, this was a really special interview. I do a lot of these. This was one of my favorite. That's big too. Having a John Anik, commentator of the UFC, shout me out on Instagram is big as well. So it's different things all together, right? That all play together. But in terms of monetization, it's important for those sponsors to see that kind of success, if you will, or to see that you have these endorsements from these bigger names, because then they're more willing. Then you can ask for more money. When you have more money, then you can make your production much better. You can do those nice Instagram posts. You can spend more money on advertising. And, I think really if you have the mentality of, working at a loss or working at breaking even for a couple of years, and it interests you and you get to talk to some really cool people, then you have to have that level of patience and that level of dedication. But I think that anybody can really do it.
I love it. So, okay. So to conclude, and I really appreciate your time, Felix, because one of the takeaways that I want to kind of people to have is, why should somebody start a podcast? With COVID, it's like a different ball game. And you don't have much money to spend on advertising. You might know a little bit more about something than somebody else. People are kind of indoors or they're traveling, but like they're not out, So I think the podcasting space got pushed forward by like 7 years, so you're seeing big deals with like Stitcher got put out 300 million. So anyway, so I think we already qualified why podcasting is hot, but why should somebody small and local use a podcast to promote their brand or business?
I think that's a tough question, because I think there are a couple issues with a little bit of what's going on. I think a lot of people, if I'm being honest, now just want to start a podcast because other people are starting a podcast, right?
True.
And I think, when you're doing something because others are, and you're doing something not out of true interest, then it becomes a little problematic, especially in a world where I think it's only like, I think 80% of podcasts have zero monetization. It's really hard.
I thought the number would be higher than 80, but wow.
I don't know. That's what I read somewhere. Yeah. It's just highly competitive. It's a lot of work. I mean, it's a lot of work, production, all the stuff that goes behind it. So if you want to start a podcast, well, I think you really need to ask yourself a lot of questions before you do. Yeah. Am I patient enough?
Yeah.
Am I dedicated enough? Do I have enough interest? Do I think I'm going to have the interest that I'm currently having for a long time? Am I willing to spend a lot of time? Am I willing to invest money,
Yeah.
effort for something that the probability of it blowing up is very small, right? So, and the other thing that I think as well is when what I like about Rogan or other shows is how broad they are.
Yeah.
And I think what becomes really hard is like, I had this one kid who I went to school with who was telling me how he's starting this podcast for neurosurgeons, right? And I think that's really cool. Like, you know, and he
Yeah.
loves that, and all, you know, all glory to him, like go for it. The only warning I gave to him was like, okay, you're into the science world. Well, maybe make it slightly broader, because if you're not into if you're not a neurosurgeon, how are you going to grow your show? You know what I mean? So what I think is really important is for people to understand that by having more of a variety of guests, even if you want to go into a specialized field, you're still opening up the potential for your audience. And I think it's really hard to have a podcast that's narrowly tailored to one specific field and expect it to blow up as the number one podcast in that field. I say that, and I also, you know, don't want to dissuade people who have an interest in starting a podcast. I think it's been really one of the joys of my life when I like really honestly, because I've gotten to know a lot of people.
Yeah.
I get to sit down with these incredibly interesting people with very different backgrounds. I mean, one day I can sit with a light former murderer to, you know, a comedian who's performing at clubs in New York City. It's a very different vibe. And I love it, you know, and I think that there's so much good conversation that comes from podcasting. And I think that it's, you really got to do it if you're really interested. There are other benefits just from it's therapeutic. It, you know, for younger people like myself, it grows. You want to talk about networking. This is how you, in my opinion, one of the ways in which you can truly network.
Sure.
Because like even some people joke around with me and they'll be like, well, you're kind of setting up your job interviews when you host your show, right? If I get like a big CEO or a big, you know, person that one day I might want to get a job with, well, I just sat down and talked to them for an hour and a half at 20 years old, and they noticed that I could do this well. Well, hey, in a couple of years when I need to find a job, maybe they're going to be more interested in helping me. Maybe not, right? But these kinds of things that I'm establishing young, I think for the younger generation as well, to understand that, you know, having face-to-face interaction with people is super important. Likewise, when you're 45, 50, 60, like just having those interactions brings a lot to your life. And I think that's what people don't really understand is if you're doing a podcast for the clout of having a podcast, don't do it. If you're doing it to actually have good conversations, learn a lot, and be interested in the subjects that you're discussing and the people that you're having those discussions with, do it. If you're doing it to promote a business, you know, you could. I don't know enough about it, so I don't want to say, you know, I don't know how much. I know a lot of people actually that have a business and start a podcast on the side to kind of, you know, complement it. And I don't know if that works or it doesn't. I'd be interested to see the research that comes from that, but it's definitely interesting, you know, and I think it's just a great platform to hear people talk, really, because especially in this day and age, we're not talking enough, in my opinion. You know, the social media and Twitter, and we're not hearing the sound of other people's voices. And you know, it's in an age where radio's dying down, and you know, people just want to hear you know, people sit down and talk in a relaxing manner. You know, I think that's a good reason enough to start a show if that's the route you want to go.
Love it. And not to scare anybody. So like, trust me, I'm not fancy. You see the little background, that's as fancy as I get. I go live to tape, so we're not editing. I don't do intros, just whatever reason. And I know well, when I originally started versus now, 100% better. And I know I have to get a lot better. I should probably put the brand there and the brand there. And I know all this, but I'm a little bit of a purist in a sense where I'm just really trying to create some really dope content. And then the content speak for itself. And it's kind of working, but I do have to pretty up. But for those people that are listening, you get a Zoom, you get a free version, even a sound, you know, you can hook up with the SoundCloud or, you know, the host or Libsyn for $30 a month. There's a whole bunch of easy things you can do. And Felix and I think, are pretty accessible if you want to reach out. So listen, I'm just impressed by you, man. I'm gonna put a link to your show to YouTube. It's gonna go up in a few minutes. So I just like how, and I'm gonna probably have you on again because I like how you ask questions. I like how you unpack things. You're an inquisitive young man, and I love that about you. It sounds kind of weird, but I love that about you.
No, I really thank you.
And I learn. So I put a link. But other than the link, if people listen to audio, how can we find you, Felix?
Please follow me on Instagram at felix.levine, Twitter at Felix Levine. My website is felix-levine.com. And then, again, the big thing is subscribing to the YouTube channel, and then subscribing on Apple's podcast app, Spotify, wherever, and giving rates and reviews and all that good stuff. You know how important that is. So, I think that's basically all the places that you can find me. I think that's it.
So just one last question, just out of my own curiosity. I probably would ask this after you shut down anyway. I was, again, historically an audio guy, a face radio, but an audio guy. So obviously my number one platform for streaming was iTunes 10X, right? But now that I'm doing more YouTube, my YouTube numbers are competing with my iTunes. You saw the value of YouTube, I think, earlier than I did. I know it's obvious, but you saw the value in it. So my question is, give me, what's your top platform for streaming right now, and what's your number two?
For sure, in the past 3-4 months, all my energy and focus has been going to the YouTube. Smart. Because for a couple reasons.
Yeah.
YouTube is algorithm based.
Yeah.
More than any other platform, really.
Correct.
You have a big name guy on your show, and it's good, and people start interacting with it, it gets pushed and pushed and pushed. You know, like Michael Franzese, I think, retweeted my show, which was very kind of him, but I don't think he did, like, because he retweeted it, some people started watching, and because some people started watching, then it got pushed more quicker to the front of, you know, if you watched a Michael Franzese video, then mine came up as a suggested one. And so I think that one is at 41,000 right now, which is my number one video.
It's a nice number.
So the important thing with that, in my opinion, is, and this we can go into it, is I truly think the future of podcasting is visual. That's just my belief. I think, as I always try to, whenever I do these things, I try to think about it in terms of what I like as a viewer, as a consumer of the content. And I always, if I can, would rather see these two people interact instead of listen. Listening is nice when you're like cooking or driving or you can't look. But generally speaking, especially with, like, you know, an Apple TV now that's super easy to go on YouTube and watch your videos, or, you know, just being able to have the YouTube app and seeing all these videos come up. I think that YouTube is still, and in my opinion, will always be the biggest tool for content creators, period, whatever industry you're in. And I think it's easy to get, especially on an Apple's podcast app or a Spotify, your show's going to get lost unless you're the top 20 and you're on those charts every week, which, you know, is very hard to do unless you're the top of the top. It's like, well, how do I get to random people, really? And I think YouTube does a phenomenal job of that. And I think I have, you know, 10 times more numbers on YouTube than I do on my audio versions. But, you know, when I'm on YouTube, it works hand in hand, right? If I plug the audio version on YouTube and a video does well, then people are going to go to the audio version. And I just believe that there's more of an upside on investing on YouTube. For me, my video versions are really important. For me, taking little clips and posting them on Instagram after all my sessions in studio is really important. I think investing in studio time is one of the most important things I've ever done in terms of financially, you know, distributing my expenses. I think for a couple reasons. The content I've noticed is far better. Between you, me, and all the listeners, my relationships with the people that I had in studio is night and day better. In terms of them, like, not just like in terms of our relationship, but in terms of them reposting for me, in terms of them following me on social media and then posting about our stuff on social media, in terms of the relationships that I develop. When I say relationships, that, you know, in the future they would want to come back on, in terms of just the true, there's a difference when, in my opinion, and this is unfortunate for in a lot of ways, especially in like the COVID era where you can't see people face to face as much, but it goes such a long way when you have an interaction and you ask someone a really meaningful question in person. There's just this, I mean, you know, but like for people who haven't really been in these kind of situations, there's just this connection that develops, right? When I'm sitting in front of John A. Light and I ask him, you murdered a lot of people, but do you genuinely feel like you can still be a good person?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, him and I grew closer that day. And then, life happened and now I'm managing their show. But, and this is not my endorsement of John A. Light or murdering, whatever. We can get into that a whole other day. But it's that's just how human interaction works, So there's this, the video versions, the being in studio, the high quality video, the high quality audio, it just makes a world of a difference, period. People now label you as professional. People now, label you as someone that they want to go on their show and devote their time, time well spent with. So it's again, everything is a snowball effect that I've noticed. And one of the main things that I will always do, no matter what, is try to be face to face with the person, and try to just execute the production at the highest level. Because, again, there are things in the fall that I'm really excited about. And part of those are going to happen because of the production that I have. And part of it because it's done at a high level. And, perhaps some people, and just to kind of tease, are interested in investing in that. And, and because now I have really a library of, I have 42 or 43 episodes of an hour and a half, 2 hours of high produced content, HD audio and video that now people want to buy into. And that's, really important to me.
Love it. So Felix, listen, this has been great. I think I told you that, well, I told you this, but for those who don't know, my middle name is Felix. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, I have a certain affinity to people named Felix. So anyway, thank you for being on the New Theory podcast, and I really appreciate you being on.
Hey, I really appreciate the time. Means a lot. And, whenever you want, just, you got to let me know all the links I'll share. And thank you for your time and having me on your show, man.
Thanks, brother.